Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, April 4th. This is day 181 since October 7th. In terms of what's happened in the last 24 hours or so, the New York Times published an article yesterday entitled "Stop It Now. Jill Biden privately urges an end to the conflict in Gaza," speaking about how the US president recounted the First Lady's concerns as he was pressed about what the world is calling the war between Israel and Hamas at a meeting on Tuesday evening with Muslim community members. I'm not sure if you've heard about this meeting. So it was Tuesday night. My understanding was that it was at the White House with Arab American leaders, but a Muslim American doctor who had just been serving patients in Gaza, is my understanding. I heard it about on NPR initially this morning, got so frustrated that he actually walked out of the meeting with the president. But this New York Times article was about how someone, heard this story told that the First Lady was putting pressure on President Biden to stop it now, is the direct quote. White House officials responded and said there's no daylight between Mr. Biden and the First Lady on the conflict, and that the president was as outraged by the civilian casualties as his wife has been. The officials from the White House said the First Lady was not calling for Israel to end its efforts against Hamas. And so it kind of seems like, yet again, the White House is walking back statements that might indicate any particular change in U.S. positions in supporting, Israel's war against Hamas. That now has resulted in the death toll, according to the health ministry, is 33,073 individuals killed in Gaza, and the number of those wounded since October 7th is 75,668. It's believed the number that's being used now that's talking about the hostages is that 130 or more hostages believed to be still held in Gaza. We are calling for their release and have been since October 7th. We're also calling for the release of those being held in Palestinian prisons without due process of law. Mr. Biden has faced growing alarm from Democrats, or certain Democrats, about his support for Israel's bombardment, as well as letters of internal dissent, including objections from officials at some 40 different government agencies. The U.S. also recently authorized the transfer of military aid to Israel. CNN reported that includes 1,500-pound bombs and over 1,000 smaller diameter bombs. And Israel presented a plan to the United States. This is that plan about Rafah that would move the 1.4 million civilians that are sheltering in those makeshift, they're not even really tents, the tarps in Rafah, to in the far north of the city, so that tent city would be moved to the north of Rafah, adding that sources said the proposal failed to include any mention of sanitation, food, or water. U.S. officials pushed back on the plan, according to the report, which led Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, quote, yelling and waving his arms around, end quote. When asked in an interview about how Israel is conducting itself in Gaza, the former President Donald Trump said, quote, "I'm not sure that I'm loving the way they're doing it," end quote. He added that they are releasing tapes of a building falling down. They shouldn't be releasing tapes like that. That's why they, meaning Israel, are losing the PR war, end quote. In Gaza, the finding of the Israeli Defense Forces investigation into the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers was presented to the Chief of Staff, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Defense Minister Gallant. That was according to the Israeli Defense Forces. And the World Central Kitchen called for an independent investigation into the attack, urging Israel to preserve any relevant documentation and criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks that such incidents happen in war. Poland's Prime Minister Tusk said that Israel should apologize and pay compensation to the family of the Polish national who was among those 7 aid workers killed. And the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin told Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant that he was outraged at the killing of the aid workers. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Israel's explanation for the deaths was, quote, not good enough. Human Rights Watch came out and said that they found no evidence that an Israeli attack that had happened on a Gaza apartment building in October, where 106 civilians were killed, targeted any militant activity inside the building, contending that it was an apparent war crime. So that was a report by the Human Rights Watch organization. And on March 27th, Axios reported that the majority of Americans now oppose Israel's actions in Gaza. 55% of Americans disapprove of Israel's military response in Gaza, which is a 10% point increase since November. Among Republicans, the percentage who approve of Israel's action has dropped from 71% in November to 64% in March, according to the poll. And in Democrats, the shift is even more significant. Fewer than 1 in 5, 18% of Democrats say they approve of Israel's action, which is down from 36% in November. More Americans support providing humanitarian aid to people in Gaza than military support to Israel, which a separate survey this month showed. U.S. President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke on the phone today for the first time since mid-March. Blinken was also a part of that conversation. And I heard a readout of it where the U.S. said that they continue to support Israel, but that there needed to be a marked or measurable in terms of the number of deaths of civilians was a part of the conversation. Israel's military intelligence chief said, "It is not certain that the worst is behind us," end quote, in terms of the war, not specifying whether or not he meant Gaza or if he was referring to Israel's conflicts with Lebanon on the border. And Israel's High Court of Justice demanded that the state provide answers by next Wednesday regarding the necessary scope of aid to Gaza. Efforts made to increase aid access and the difficulties faced in delivering it. This is a response to a petition by 5 Israeli human rights organizations. We also know that in Israel, GPS jamming, which has been operating since the outbreak, since the beginning of October, has expanded into central Israel, including parts of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And 7 Israelis and 4 Palestinians have been arrested on suspicion of planning. This is from Haaretz, of planning, quote unquote, terror attacks in Israel and planning to assassinate National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, end quote. The Shin Bet, IDF, and Israel police announced this in a joint statement. Also, the Beersheba District Court extended the detention of Saba Hanania, the sister of Hamas Politburo Chief Ismail Haniyeh, by 12 days. We did get news that Hamas rejected the latest ceasefire hostage deal proposal. Osama Hamdan, a Hamas official in Lebanon, said that Israel is digging in its heels and that negotiations are at a stalemate. Protesters also gathered in Jerusalem and Beersheba, calling for the return of hostages and blocked dozens of roads in both cities. There are concerns in Israel about a reprisal attack for the killing of the senior Revolutionary Guard because of the attacks on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, amid fears of Iranian retaliation for the alleged Israeli strike that killed the senior Revolutionary Guard general. The IDF spokesperson told the public that there is no need to buy generators, stockpile food, or withdraw cash. The Palestinian Authority has stated that they have asked for a renewed consideration of a 2011 application to become a full member of the United Nations. It currently has de facto recognition of the sovereign state of Palestine after the UN granted it the status of non-member observer state in 2012. The US has said that Palestine, or the Palestinian Authority, should seek recognition as a state through direct negotiations, not through the UN. And U.S. aid's point person for the West Bank and Gaza met with the newly appointed Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa to discuss development goals for Palestinians and Gaza's humanitarian crisis. The Houthis, the U.S. military said it destroyed an inbound anti-ship ballistic missile and drones launched by Iranian-backed Houthis from Yemen toward the Red Sea. And 600 British lawyers, including 3 former Supreme Court judges, signed a letter warning that the UK government is breaching international law by continuing to export arms to Israel, The Guardian reported. If you have not joined us in signing our international letter, I would welcome you to do so, and we will continue in our advocacy, calling for a comprehensive ceasefire and an end to all violence as we work together toward peace.